I'd like to show you how easy it is to join two pieces of knitting together using grafting. Grafting is also sometimes called Kitchener stitch. Let's have a look at this in theory. Here we've got 3 regular direction stitches knit in that direction, and we want to put them together with 3 stitches knit in the opposite direction, so the stitches are coming together head to head. What grafting is a needle inserted or a threaded needle inserted row of knitting stitches. So to join these 2 rows of knitting together, we need to take the sewing yarn around behind where that stitch wants to be narrow, and that's actually the sides of this stitch and that one, but where they want to come together like the base of a V, we go round there. We come across to the opposite side, and these 2 stitch sides come together like the top of an A. So we go round both those stitch sides and underneath. Back to where we came from on the other side, around the next 2 stitch sides, until we've got nowhere left to go. Then we can take the other end of the piece of yarn and sew around those 2 stitch sides, back to where we came from, and stick it out at the side. When you join stitches head to head, you will wind up with a half stitch sticking out here and a half stitch sticking out on the other side if they had equal numbers when we began. And you'll notice that they are actually joined with 1, 2 and a half orange stitches. So there's always a slight joggle, but if you hide the sides, you'll never know the difference. Here are 2 pieces of knitting that have been begun with a waste yarn flap. We'll deal with those in future videos. And there is my piece of blue knitting that I wish to join to that piece of blue knitting. And instead of binding them off, I've actually used 4 rows of waste yarn and put the stitches on the end of the yarn. What I want to do now is to join these 2 pieces together. And my reason for using waste yarn is that it allows us to see the stitches flat. When our stitches sit on the needle, they're twisted at 90 degrees to the direction of the work. The other thing about brightly contrasting waste yarn is it shows us where our sewing yarn needs to go. So this pink stitch here goes through there, and it goes around where that blue stitch wants to be the base of a V. I'm going to leave a tail for finishing that edge later. Then on this side, that pink stitch goes around here at the top of an A, where the 2 sides of the blue stitches want to be the top of a capital A. And from that point forward, you just go back to the same loop you came from and copy the next waste yarn stitch. And you pull them to the same size and shape as the rest of the stitches in the work. It should look just like unbroken stocking stitch right across the join. And that looks just like another row of knitting. If I were doing a shoulder, I would start near the edge, and before I go too much further, I'd go and check that this edge matches properly. Because I prefer sewing right to left, I've turned it upside down. I go to the stitch I came out from last time, and I've got nothing left at the side. So that's as far as this piece of yarn can go. And you can see I've got half a stitch left over here, but that's as close as we can get when we're grafting stitches head to head. Now when you're using waste yarn, it does give you this wonderful sewing guide, but it's always possible to be off by half a unit. So can you see the difference? If I put my needle in here, that's not what the pink yarn does. The pink yarn does not take that path. And if I were to do that and then pinch my sewn stitch, the white one, you can see that it squeezed the two sides of that stitch together into what I call the dreaded 11s. So that means you're not following the waste yarn correctly. So now I'm just going to complete this graft, and then we'll take a look at removing the waste yarns. If I'm not happy with it, it's as easy as just pulling on there and removing it and starting again. You don't have to worry about live stitches because they're held on your waste yarn for you. At the very far end, I've only got one more needle move I can make, and there is my half stitch sticking out here. So it's on the top on that side, it's on the bottom on that side, and I should be able to see 11.5 sewn stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 11.5. So I've joined that as best it can possibly be done, and now I can remove the waste yarn. Because we're using a contrasting colour, we can also make another check on the private side. Can you see how we have made twin stitches, copying exactly all the pink pearl bumps on both sides? That doesn't show nearly as clearly when you're working in the original colour. Now to remove first one waste yarn, and take a look. It's all perfectly together. And then the second. You can use this method in a shoulder situation. You could do short rows on your shoulder, top it off with waste yarn, and then graft it at your leisure. And that's how beautiful and easy it should be.